Very good morning. You're watching NewsX and I'm Shivani Singh. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Melbourne for a 3-day visit. This is his third visit to Australia in a decade, and he landed on July 8th, arriving from Indonesia, where he toured the Paramban Temple with President of Indonesia. And today, on July 9th, he addressed the India-Australia CEOs Forum, pushing trade and investment ties. He now heads into the annual Leaders Summit with the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, and talks are expected to cover uranium supply, critical minerals, defence cooperation, and a very possible trade deal, with India also raising delays in student visa processing. Now, in a break from protocol, Governor General Sam Mortson travelled to Melbourne to meet him personally. Now, tonight, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also address a massive diaspora rally at the Marvel Stadium, and tomorrow he and Prime Minister Albanese will visit the MCG before Prime Minister Modi departs for his final leg of this tour, which is New Zealand. To discuss this special occasion, we have a very special guest joining us today. Bryce Wakefield. He's the CEO of the Australian Institute of International Affairs and a visiting fellow at the Australian National University. He's joining us from Canberra. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your time and for speaking to NewsX. We appreciate it. A very good morning to you from India.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I feel special to be invited as a special guest.
So let's start off this discussion with something that has been of importance for quite some time between India and Australia, which is uranium. India and Australia are reportedly looking to finalize a very historic commercial uranium supply pact. I want to understand how significant is this deal for Australia's export economy, and what are the primary domestic regulatory hurdles that we might face, sir?
Sure. I'd slightly qualify the premise of the question. I don't think it's as historic as some might claim. Australia and India already have a civil nuclear cooperation framework. So this is really about moving towards a commercially meaningful implementation rather than creating an entirely new relationship for the two countries. Economically, I don't think uranium exports will transform the Australian export economy overnight, but strategically they sort of deepen a long-term energy partnership between Australia and India. Now, to go to the latter part of your question, there are significant regulatory hurdles, I guess. I mean, uranium is not a normal export. Every shipment is subject to bilateral safeguards that make sure that uranium will be used for civilian purposes. Projects have to meet Australian environmental and regulatory approval processes. And it should be remembered that in Australia, uranium mining remains quite a politically sensitive topic, and states within the Australian Federation do maintain their own restrictions on mining. So those will have to be met as well at mining and export. So the political agreement is important, but translating it into a sort of commercial reality still requires clearing a number of regulatory and commercial hurdles.
Absolutely. And so when we're talking about trade and commerce, beyond critical minerals and energy, where do you see the next big breakthrough in bilateral trade, particularly as both the nations are trying to, decouple their supply chains from China?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't refer it as the old canard that it's probably not decoupling, it's more de-risking, right? The next big breakthrough between Australia and India, however, is likely to come in terms of services, which is quite an important sector or sectors for both economies. I think Australia and India already have laid a strong foundation for reducing trade barriers and goods with the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. But the next step is concluding the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, or CECA, and that would deepen market access, investment, and crucially, access to services, which is a big concern for both economies, particularly in Australia with education. And I think that's where the relationship has the greatest room to grow.
Absolutely. And since we are, talking about China, I also want to understand, given Australia's very complex economic and geopolitical balancing act in the Indo-Pacific, how is India's growing assertiveness against China's regional dominance viewed over there, sir?
Yeah, so look, I wouldn't really frame it as Australia supporting India against China per se. I think Australia welcomes India's growing capacity to contribute to defence and security arrangements and a stable balance in the Indo-Pacific. However, having said that, we all know that India is an independent strategic actor. Canberra increasingly sees it as an indispensable partner, but the basis for that partnership is going to grow incrementally through, for example, increased Indian participation in maritime exercises, increased cooperation around maritime domain awareness, so monitoring the oceans. And in supporting a rules-based regional order while recognizing that India will continue to maintain its own strategic autonomy and positions vis-a-vis China.
Absolutely. And so we are also seeing a very rapid deepening of defense and also maritime security ties between India and Australia. What concrete strategic commitments do you expect from both the nations during this entire visit, sir?
Yeah, again, I wouldn't expect dramatic announcements. There will be good news stories, of course. Australia and India have generally preferred, though, practical, incremental cooperation. Again, as I said, I'd expect further progress on maritime domain awareness, more sophisticated bilateral and also multilateral naval exercises, defense industry collaboration, perhaps. And general intelligence sharing. Now, those may sound incremental, but over time they're strategically very significant.
So overall, so you're not seeing any, historic announcements being made, just strengthening of, previous ties. Is that it?
Yeah, look. Like a lot of relationships developing in the region, for example, relationships between the EU and India and the EU and Australia, the relationship has already moved beyond the question as to whether this bilateral relationship matters for the two countries. Both governments agree that it does. And the real test now is implementation. Right. So if Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Albanese can deliver on CECA, they can announce concrete investment in supply chain initiatives, and strengthen defense cooperation with clear timelines and practical considerations, right? Then the partnership will be seen as delivering results rather than just shared aspirations.
Absolutely. In fact, since you mentioned, implementation of these ties, as far as execution is concerned, sir, then I want to understand what must Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Albanese achieve at this particular summit to prove that this partnership is moving just beyond shared rhetoric?
Yeah, look, again, I don't think there will, of course, be deliverables, and who knows what they will be. I mean, hopefully it is fast-tracking CECA, the Comprehensive Economic and Cooperation Agreement. But I think in terms of actually the proof of the pudding being in the eating, if you like, that will come after the pageantry of the bilateral meeting.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Wakefield, for joining us on this broadcast. We truly appreciate your valuable perspective on this issue.